All right, welcome. Can't make time on Holy Cow. This, I think, is the eighth in the series. We've had quite a long break. We've been still pursuing the politics in another series. Hadley's had it was like an exam period that you were in, and then a break, a mid-year break. So we're very much in this mode of beginning to push again. So excuse our stumbling and effort. I'm going to just give a bit of an introduction, a little bit of a sense of where we've come from to frame ourselves a bit. And it's been reflected in the series as a whole. We're kind of holding a few things in tension. We are each coming to this text with our own reasons, with our personal reasons. Hadley wrote his master's on this text. He studied it deeply. He's been reading it for 5+ years now. Is that correct? Probably around there. Um, his personal copy is dog-eared and etc. So he's been leading the way. Um, C.P.R was not with us the last few sessions where we were getting into the preface. We still haven't left the preface of the first edition. Um, so I was saying we each have our kind of personal reasons for engaging the text. Then we have the reason as a group. One of those reasons could be the text itself. So we're interested in kind of engaging it on its own terms, and that's quite a sincere effort on our part. We really want to see what the text says to us in our attempt to grapple with it, um, whilst at the same time allowing the conversation and the exploration, because it inevitably will. But we've also given quite a bit of license to this feature in this series, allowing our context to speak to the text, allowing ourselves to wonder, maybe meander a bit, so that we find um, resonance within our context, because we come to the text from somewhere, and that informs the way that we approach it, and so we bring that kind of thing into reflection from time to time. What's kind of reflected in the playlist on the themes. I think um, the catalyzing session, or a session that really marked a turn in terms of our approach, I think was the fourth one. Hadley brought the question, how is it possible to change the world? And we really dug into the preface um, that time. Um, we're still in the preface, which we're going to be continuing with today. And then the last thing I'm going to say is a kind of introduction, and then it just occurred to me now, but maybe we just uh, bounce between us, and then Hadley will lead us into the text in terms of why we're coming to the text, how we're thinking about it, or what the series has done up until this point. But I'm influenced and inspired by kind of framing um, given by Cadell last, and he's very much within his Ezekian um, flow of thought, which is pointing back to Hegel. Hegel is post-Kantian in the sense that I want to point to now. Part of the kind of personal reason, and I think wider contextual reason why it might be worthwhile to read Kant, is that he represents a break, or some kind of rupture, such that the thought that happens before him and then the thought that happens after him is defined, or can be defined in a sense by him, by the contribution that he makes. And there are stakes to how we metabolize the moment of Kant. So much so that we might say different streams of philosophy kind of develop after Kant. The one generally continental, we might say, we can read them as being more faithful to the break that Kant makes or represents. Um, Generally, he kind of, and this is now where I would be out of my depth and just speaking quite, uh, I guess as freely and loosely as I can. Kant transcendentally constitutes the subject. The thinkers who I said were or are faithful to that break are those thinkers who take that subject and put it into motion. They reckon with that transcendental constitution. They try not to cut it short, and they put it into motion. So the thinker that comes to mind is someone like Hegel. There, I'll maybe just link a particular article I have in mind that I'm not going to be able to do justice to now, that draws out the wider cultural kind of consequences of what's happening in the area of thought that I'm speaking of now, of why it, I wanted to say bereaves us, but that's not the appropriate word. Why it why it will be beneficial. That's also not the word I'm looking for. It's not why it behooves us. Doesn't want to say behooves. Why it behooves us.
Yeah.
to think about Kant, to think about his contribution. Or the cut that he makes specifically, or the way I'm thinking about it, how he transcendentally constitutes the subject, which I'm seeing very much, just to put like a cultural and philosophical parallel in terms of say an Eastern mode of thought, the way that a path to the absolute can be taken as this differentiating or distinguishing what is not a part of the subject so as to realize the truth of the subject. You kind of cut away everything that it is not. You transcendentally constitute it. Kant might be different to that in the sense that he develops a framework for how the subject itself constitutes reality or experience, rather, what it experiences. And then I'm just using this kind of parallel. The movement in hypothesizing this so that I can think it, post-Kant is taking that transcendentally constituted subject and bringing it into motion with the world, which might be this more outward movement expression of thought that is a possible distinction between, say, Vedantic tradition and Tantric tradition, in the loosest kind of brushstrokes that I could use right now. That's my sense of the relevance of the project. Hadley has shared a number of times. I think he's getting it from Winfield. I can link also that course that you shared with us, Hadley, that I think you took last year. Last year already. That's quite. Where Dr. Winfield at the University of Georgia, that Hadley is studying at now, said that other cultures might have had a Kant, or they might not have, but it's really not important, or it's not. This is what we are studying now. We're studying Kant. So I think that concludes my reflection, my attempt to orient, my attempt to give voice to both personal reason for reading and engaging Kant, apart from that more like pure motivation of just engaging the text. It all comes in, and an attempt to kind of get the ball rolling as we pick up this series again. Hadley's going to be leading us, so I think Sipho, if you have any like introductory comments or notes or where you're at in coming to the text or anything you want to share, and then Hadley will lead the way.
I'm approaching this one as a toddler, and possibly even before a toddler. I'm approaching this subject as an infant. Like I don't really know much or anything about Kant, so I'm counting on you guys to carry me through this. Like yeah, my intellectual life is in your hands, Jens. That's about it on this subject. Bruh.
Hadley, are you comfortable with that responsibility?
I've ruined a few children in my life, I would imagine, so Sipho won't be the first.
But the it's maybe it's worthwhile to say that the initial inspiration for this series came from a problem that you raised, Sipho. I think we were talking about Descartes.
Mhm.
We were talking about um the skeptic, the one who's skeptical about the possibility of knowledge of outside events or the world. Um, and then I think your specific question or um, the problem you were bringing forward was whether the knower isolated from a community of knowledge could um, come to knowledge or come to be skeptical about knowledge. Something that Hadley might remember more faithfully.
Yeah, vaguely I remember that we were entertaining some sort of the impossibility of having a private experience because the private experience that Descartes' meditator partakes in depends on and presupposes language and being within a community of language users. So, like Descartes couldn't even engage in the sort of skeptical meditations that he did unless there was available to him a set of words or concepts that describe states that he could then doubt those states, and he must be making use of those languages and states and all of those things to acquire knowledge. And then I think I was upset about that for some reason, and said, "No, we don't need that. Language is not the priority. That the internal perspective, the reasoner, is prior to language." Was the suggestion that I made. That even our ability to come into contact with a language using community, that very ability to experience others and to interact and engage with others, depends on and presupposes some sort of reasonable capacity. So it was a question of what takes priority in our mental lives, I would imagine.
Nice, nice. The yeah, the that for me, I think the question that I have is kind of like this: how much is the moving through Kant coming to some kind of recognition um of that fact about oneself? And I was using the word like transcendentally constituted. Um, this which there is this kind of withdrawing movement of it.
Mhm.
But the way that then I read the consequences, like if you don't do the manner of withdrawal, then your outward movement in terms of thinking or acting in the world is going to be um, co-constituted by the degree to which the yourself as subject has not been transcendentalized. Um,
I think that's one way of framing the issue. The other way of framing the issue, I think, and the more relevant way for the contemporary discussion is what are the transcendental conditions of experience, or what are those factors that constitute experience? One way to go about it is we haven't come across this in the text as yet because we haven't passed the preface. But one way to go about this is to think about what are the sort of things that Kant thinks are those constitutive factors that make experience possible. And we got into this because he will suggest that there are things like space and time and certain concepts, categories that we must use to organize our experience data. Um, and those are independent of experience. They make experience possible and so can't be derived from experience. And so, in that sense, since they're not from the world or not from experience, they must be from us. And so the question becomes after Kant, one of the ways that the lines of thinking gets taken is, well, what is the justification for Kant's assertion of space and time as being properties of the subject? What's the justification for the concepts that he comes up with? And are those things possible without language? So the question is, is language first and foremost some sort of transcendental condition or some sort of condition for the possibility of experience? Does the language that we use shape our world, and that in turn determine how we experience the world? And if so, do we need to be embedded within a practice or a culture of linguistic users to experience, properly speaking, like before we come up with fully formed words and we just communicate by like gesture and grunt and, you know, as the grunter at the braai did without using words. Does that change the landscape, our intellectual landscape or our experiential landscape? And you can think of that like, imagine I had to say like swan, right? Like swan is very specific. I point to the swan, I say swan, and you know the species of the bird, you know that it's probably like a white bird with a long neck or whatever. I don't know what swans look like, but it doesn't matter for the sake of this case. But that's a much more rich description than if I just go, right? Like, what am I pointing to? To give the Quinian example, like, am I pointing to the background? Am I pointing to the wing part of the bird? Am I pointing to the beak? Like, what is the pointing at? Whereas the swan is supposed to pick out this array, this configuration of things that is the beak and the wings and the feathers and all of the swan parts, so to speak. And so in that sense, the word swan seems to enrich our experience of the bird that we're thinking about. And maybe language is a condition for the possibility of the experience of specific kinds of objects. And then the question becomes, well, if that's a condition for the possibility of experience of certain kinds of objects, and language must be something that we create together, then it can't be completely independent of experience. Somehow it must come before experience, and then we can say, well, it doesn't have to come before experience in the sense of being a private projection that we map onto the world in some sense. I don't know what I think Kant or Descartes would have it, but it would be some sort of evolutionary aspect. Like it's prior to my experience or your experience insofar as the concept comes into being before I was. So like there were generations before me and we start picking out birds and they start saying like swan and parrot and stuff like that. And then the concept in some sense is prior to my experience, but it's also derived from experience. And so it has this weird dual relationship where it is making experience possible in the sense, but in a completely different sense than what Kant has in mind, because it would not be purely independent of experience in the sense that he has in mind. It wouldn't have no content from experience. So I think that's one way of framing it. But I think the other thing that you said was relevant is that one of the reasons for coming to Kant is that he represents a crisis. Like this is a breaking point in the history of reason, if you want to call it that, in philosophy, in the way that we do philosophizing. And so the way that I've just cashed that out as language being the condition for the possibility rather than Kant's transcendental conditions reflects that people who make this sort of a move, possibly Wittgenstein, possibly Quine, possibly Heidegger, depending on how you read philosophy of language. It shows that this is in a sense, a post-Kantian development, in that what they're trying to do is think about what makes experience or thinking or reasoning possible. It's just cashed out in different terms. And so when you frame the sort of continental project as one that continues this tradition of the transcendental subject, I like to think about it as sort of a tradition that continues to try and work out some of the kinks in this project. So it's unclear how much Kant got right. And we should be thinking about that when we're reading the text. Like, are the arguments he's making plausible? Is the account complete? All of this sort of stuff. And where is there, if any, sort of wiggle room to think about how he should have reframed the project? So even if the project is itself valuable, there might be different ways of carrying out the project that are more valuable than others. So
Yeah.
that was a lot of speaking, but hopefully it'll serve as a good setup for the recap, and then we can get into the actual text. So can I really see the text?
Maybe a bit bigger. Let's make my big. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool.
Cool. So yeah, the way that I'd like to
Perfect.
reframe this, or yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, cool. So the way that I'd like to reframe this whole thing is through the lens of crisis, because Dan brought it up. I think it's an interesting way to think about the recap. So we started in the preface and we went from 99 to about 101. So we're about 2 pages into the preface, I think, 2 or 3 pages. And so it's not too much to recap, but if we think about it in terms of crisis, just going all the way back to the beginning of the text, we start with the assertion that human reason has a fate that in one species of its cognitions, it's burdened with questions which it cannot dismiss since they are given to it as problems by the nature of reason itself, but which it also cannot answer since they transcend every capacity of human reason. And we started by saying that there are these questions that we have to ask. Why is this the way it is? What are the conditions of knowing? How do we know anything? Where does our thinking come from? That, we just ask, they just happen to occur because of reason. And they also, at the same time, even though we can raise them and ask them, lead us to something which it seems like we can't answer. We have these big questions, usually thought of as metaphysical questions, and we get to a point where the explanations seem to lose their grounding, and we sort of have to come there. And Kant thinks that this is part of the very nature of reason. It falls into this perplexity through no fault of its own. Reason begins by trying to figure out the ordinary world that it finds itself in. It begins from principles whose use is unavoidable in the course of experiences and at the same time sufficiently warranted. And with these principles, it keeps going higher and higher until it finds something that oversteps all possible experience. So you think about it in terms of ordinary science, right? We're trying to figure out why the stone falls or something like that. And we see that this stone falls and that stone falls and all of these stones fall. And then eventually we come up with some sort of universal formula for gravity or something like that, or mathematics to explain this phenomenon. And then we wonder, like, how is there universal law possible? What is a law, right? Like, we have these experiences, these things follow rules. Why should phenomena follow rules? And any answer from within the domain of experience seems circular because it's going to be the very things in experience that follow those rules. So this is what reason does. It attempts to sort of grasp the world and figure things out, and it keeps trying to get to these principles. But the principles, even though they are ordinary principles, things that we employ in our daily life that are helpful, that are useful for explaining the world, they lead reason to fall into obscurity and contradiction. This is the point of crisis. Once we get up to the explanation of metaphysics or whatever you want to call it, when we try to answer questions like what is being, what is knowing, what is thinking, we come to these opposing conclusions. Things like, we need language to think first, or we need a private experience to think first. And it seems like none of them can be justified, but also that they don't fit with one another. It's either language first or our meditative state first. And it seems like neither one has good claim to make that assertion. So Kant says that this leads to the battlefield of endless controversies called metaphysics. It's a place where we're going to keep arguing about metaphysical principles without getting any further. And this leads to an important distinction that he makes at 99 between dogmatism, skepticism, and indifferentism. Those are the three main schools that we're interested in. And this is the point of rupture, the point of crisis. The dogmatic philosophers were those people who thought that they could read the character of being straight away, that there was a sort of unity of knowing and being, and they didn't have to investigate the faculty of reason before they could come to know stuff. So you can think of like pre-Descartes philosophy, if you want a very easy example. Descartes starts off by trying to doubt everything and trying to figure out what we can know with certainty. Whereas someone like maybe Aristotle, depending on how you read him, might just start off by thinking about the nature of the subject that he's talking about. Like in De Anima, he'll think about what the soul is or something like that, and he won't call into question what we can know with certainty. The skeptics are those sorts of people that are going to engage in this project of doubt. I'm hearing of Descartes, but Kant has in mind Hume, I think more so, who calls into question very important principles like causality and the principle of sufficient reason. And then the indifferentists are the people that just don't care anymore, that really, aren't interested in doing metaphysics and think that we can get along very well without it, right? So these people think, so there's contradictions in metaphysics, and the contradiction can't exist, so metaphysics can't exist, would essentially be their point. And we can just do science without thinking about metaphysics. We don't have to worry about the study of being or the study of reason or whatever we think metaphysics is. We don't even need to try and figure that out. We just need to do the hard work of thinking about things and just carrying on with empirical investigations or whatever we want to think about. So all of this leads Kant to the assertion that it is pointless to affect indifference with respect to such inquiries, for whose object, human nature, cannot be indifferent. And essentially what he's saying there is that even to be indifferent, even to occupy this position, even to doubt that metaphysics is possible, we need a sort of metaphysics. There has to be the study of being or the study of knowing, because in order to claim that we don't need this, we either have to know that or we have to be the type of thing that doesn't need to know what being is. And that pretty much brings us to where we were, which is that on the one hand, it appears as though metaphysics is this natural tendency that all human reasoners have, which we strive towards. And on the other hand, we have this incompatibility, which seems like metaphysics is impossible because we haven't been able to come to a conclusion about its status yet in the history of philosophy up until Kant. So that's kind of where we left off. I think that serves as a good recap, but you can let me know, have I missed anything out? Have I said too much, too little? Give me a shout.
Was where you concluded there? Was that at the courtroom, this moment? Not quite at the courtroom.
Yeah, we are just before the courtroom. So we were at, it is pointless to affect difference with respect to such inquiries to whose object human nature cannot be indifferent. This is setting the stage for the courtroom, and the courtroom happens on the next page, where once we realize basically that the indifferentism to thinking about pure reason can't work out, that reason must try to think on its own terms about what its subject matter properly is. So basically the sort of idea is that in order to even be indifferent or to be skeptical, we need to be using our reason. And so reason needs to come to a decision about metaphysics for its own sake, once and for all, to determine whether metaphysics is actually possible.
Once and for all, and yet again, and always.
Unfortunately, so I would imagine.
So, okay, yeah.
I wonder if you want to stick with that for a little bit. C.P.R, are you following as well, just to check? Because like I went quickly in my head, but I know that it took very long as well.
Oh, no, so far, following so far.
Yeah, so let's stick with that once and for all, and forever again, just really quickly. So how are you thinking about the once and for all and forever again? Because I think it's true, but there's
Yeah,
two different ways in which it could be true, and the options on the table lead to very different results. So once and for all would mean that, so this is the first option, option A, let's call it. Kant solves metaphysics once and for all, right? Metaphysics is complete after Kant. And then the forever again is not doing the whole project over again. It's not reasoning about reason to come to true self-knowledge or anything like that. It's each individual reasoner reasoning about the critique of pure reason and coming to the realization that Kant was right. Right? So the forever again is an iterative process whereby the people engaged in reading the critique of pure reason, generations change, people are born and die, and unfortunately, forever and ever again, we're just going to have to read Kant. That's, it's just so good. Every generation's just got to read him, just till the end of humanity or thinking as such. It'll be relevant to everybody forever and ever, over and over again. Option B, I would imagine, is that we have to try and come to this decision once and for all. We need some sort of closure to think and to reason. And Kant doesn't really get it right. And so the forever and ever again is trying to get it right, eternally anew, to correct course. Everybody needs to reason about reasoning for themselves. And then I guess there's a third option that does also arise. And I'm not sure how exhaustive my disjunction is here, so pardon me if I'm leaving anything else out. But the third option I would imagine is the once and for all, and then over and over again could be understood as we settle on what reason is once and for all. But since each reasoner finds themselves in a different context of reasoning, reason itself has to be decided upon forever anew in each iteration of itself. Reason is developing.
Third one, the third one. The one that sticks out to me, because like after everything, the question that's in my head now, it's stuck in my head, is how do we describe reason? And like, is there like a yeah, that is just stayed to every time that the definition of reason change slightly, we have to reinvestigate reason again. Am I making sense?
Yeah, it's hard to tell. I would imagine that Kant wants his book to be the first option, that like, he gets it right, the system is complete, and then we just continue to read the Critique of Pure Reason. But the third option is really interesting because it raises the question of whether reason is like, what type of self-sameness reason has. Like, it raises issues of whether reason is one thing or many things, what gives it its sort of intellectual shape. Are there many versions of history and reason, and does reason change when it's in a new context? So I think those are all important questions. And I think to some extent, we won't actually be able to answer the question until transcendental dialectic, which is where we get a definition of what reason is. So at the outset, we're just kind of like trying out streams of like thought, thinking about like floating in the river of reason.
No, that's fair. That's fair.
I want to
Nope.
I want to remain here a while. I'm just curious before, Hadley, you said needing a closure. I'm not sure if you remember, it was a little while ago. Something like reason requiring a closure. Do you remember when you said that?
Yeah. I can tell you why I said
Do you
that.
remember what you meant?
Yeah, I do. It comes a little bit later in the courtroom. But I'll read the section that I have in mind. So this is straight after the Critique of Pure Reason in the courtroom. And this is, I'm going to read the paragraph before as like a setup, and then we can continue. So, yet by this, I do not understand a critique of books and systems, but a critique of the faculty of reason in general, in respect of all the cognitions after which reason might strive independently of all experience, and hence the decision about the possibility or impossibility of metaphysics in general, and the determination of its sources as well as its extents and boundaries, all, however, from principles. So we covered that in our last video, and we said that this is the project. We think about the nature of reason, and we can do that because reason is used to produce these books and systems and all that sort of stuff. So reason must be able to think about itself and come to this metaphysical self-knowledge. And then we'll talk about closure. Why do we need closure in order to reason about the world or in order to have metaphysical self-knowledge? This comes a little bit later after this paragraph. I'm going to skip all the way to the bottom, and maybe this would be a good into trying to work our way back in reverse to what Kant is talking about. So it comes after this highlighted section that I pulled up. And he says something like, he makes this odd assertion. In fact, pure reason is such a perfect unity that if its principles were insufficient for even a single one of the questions that are set for it by its own nature, then this principle might as well be discarded, because then it would also not be up to answering any of the other questions with complete reliability. So Kant thinks that reason is such a perfect unity and has this characteristic of oneness, that if whatever the principle of reason is, whatever reason uses to reason, can't answer a single question that is given to it by its own nature, then it doesn't need this principle, because any other question that is given to it also couldn't be answered. This is a very strong claim, I think. And this is the idea of closure. So how are you thinking about how I was thinking about speaking of closure? And how does this passage change that down?
Okay, it's in the context of these three options, which for me is linking to this like what kind of frame we apply to this, like this developmental thing. So Dr. Winfield's statement that other cultures might have had Kant, but I don't know, and it doesn't matter. So there's something in his event, um, which is then on an individual developmental sense, it's like there's something that Kant reveals, something that Kant moves through or constitutes that is important to an individual development in a philosophical sense, maybe to move through that moment. Then there's the question of like, is there a means other than the critique to doing that? So like I guess the stakes or the context of it for me is there in that question of to metabolize and move from rather than be before, or use Kant as like um the standard or the end goal. And I think that's what the word closure brought forward to me, is that like this the end of the sense for or the need for an end goal. So the way that in like a shorthand, like I think part of what I assume post-Kantian movement would be something that has a kind of motion in it that is not resolvable or can't be fixed, or that it introduces into thought something that is more dynamic. So the reason or the reasoner, once so constituted and once moving from, is not seeking um, finality, closure, or uh, uh, finished.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's difficult, I think. Maybe there's an equivocation between two senses of closure going on here, and two senses of completeness or finality. So, for one thing, the post-Kantian tradition, at least like people like Hegel, there is sort of a completeness to the system, like through the developments of the shapes of thinking and the phenomenology of spirit comes to know itself, and that's the end of the phenomenology. And then I think, I don't know the science of logic too well, but the science of logic is the self-development of being as being comes to be itself, or something like that, through the course of its development. So there is this dynamism, but the closure is a sort of completion of shapes, or like a completion of some sort of way. But I think the relevant sense of closure here, and why I think this debate of whether Kant is an endpoint or a starting point is one I think that's rife in the literature and the stuff that's like in the post-Kantian movement, like whether we begin from Kant or whether we just repeat Kant over and over again. So it's a good issue. The way that I was thinking about the closure is in terms of those three positions that we had on the table: dogmatism, skepticism, and indifferentism. And the sort of closure that I'm thinking about here is like, if you think about the skeptic who is asking about like the principles of reasoning or what we can know, the extent of our knowledge, they might be like tempted to say like, well, why this or why that, and have you give an explanation for everything. And if you can't explain one specific thing, then you're always liable to the like objection that, oh, well, you don't know this, and if you don't know this, how do you know that? There's this sort of interconnection between the facts that we can know. And so if there's a single fact missing, or if there's a single claim to knowledge that we can't justify, then it seems like all our other knowledge claims are equally unjustified. But it's a big claim, and it's unclear whether it's true or useful or an assumption that's being brought to the table. Like, this is a big claim, and I thought that it would be useful to think about disclosure and work backwards from this to the beginning of that paragraph and try and see whether we can make sense of it. Because this is the part where I think people are most anti-Kant. And part of it has to do, I think, with how arrogant he sounds. Like, it's a big claim to be making that he's going to solve all the problems of metaphysics and that the system of knowledge is going to be complete. There's going to be closure. There's going to be no question that is unsatisfactorily answered by this book. It's going to answer all our questions. And what sort of a book proclaims to do that? Right? Like, how does he have this special insight? Like, how does he know that his work is going to be this influential? Because it seems like it is. The weird part about this is that not only is it a stupendously big claim, I'm going to answer everything, and pure reason has such a nature that it can completely answer all the questions that we are tempted to ask. But the really strange part is not that Kant is so arrogant that he asserts that, but that there are people that have been influenced to the point that think that he's right about it. Like the fact that it was verified.
Yeah, I was
taking up about it.
I was wondering your commitment in terms of that.
Yeah, Sipho?
Sorry, Sipho?
Shit. I might have just answered all the questions through this. He might have convinced himself. I mean, that level of confidence doesn't just pop
It's
up.
jumpy. I'm not getting.
Doesn't just pop. You're getting me clearly.
No, you, Hadley?
It was a little bit jumpy on my side as well. Do you want to repeat, Sipho?
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
No, I was saying maybe he was convinced by his argument to the point where he had to say that this is gonna answer everything, Jen. Like there's nothing else after this. Maybe he was that convinced himself, because that type of confidence just. I mean, I'm getting the feeling that you might be convinced by.
Yeah.
That was also the question yeah.
So to delve into the personal, I guess I'm gonna read the first part of the section and then I'll delve into the personal to explain my position to it. So after he says that the critique of pure reason is the courtroom that's going to determine the boundaries and stuff of reason from principles, he makes this assertion: it is on this path, the only one left, that I have set forth, and I flatter myself that in following it, I have succeeded in removing all those errors that have so far put reason into dissension with itself and its non-experiential use. I think that's where we actually ended in the last episode of the series. And yeah, he's just making crazy claims. The only path left for philosophy is the critique of pure reason, and we're going to answer every single question. And on a personal note, my fascination with Kant is twofold. On the one hand, I think it's a crazy claim to make. It's super arrogant. It's kind of wild. And he must be delusional. Like, this is the sound of a delusional person speaking. Somebody who's just like cooked and like doesn't actually like seriously believe that he could be doing something like this. And I think part of that's because of the age that we live in, and this relates to the how to change the world question, is like, I don't think you would find somebody confident enough nowadays to say, this is philosophy. We're done. Read this book. I've figured it all out. Just from sitting in this chair thinking about it, like I've grasped the principles of pure reason, and I've solved all the questions that we could ever want to answer satisfactorily. In what, 700 pages? It's a bit long, but if you think about it, really, 700 pages is quite short for all of human history's questions. All of reason's questions in 700 pages, and you're going to say it's the only way to do it. That's a massive claim. So that's the one side of me. And then the other side of me says, I've been doing academic philosophy for too long to know that unless you're really sure, you wouldn't write something like this. Like, you just get it. Like, you don't make these big claims unless you have some reason to trust that they're true. And I think that the interesting thing about Kant is that he opens up these, even if he's not right, he opens up the opportunity to think about the really big questions, which is like, yeah, can we specify the whole use of reason? Like, can we know everything that we need to know? Like, or like, are we always going to be left with questions? Is there always going to be some stuff that's unknowable, and that, will like need to be doubted in the future or need to be refined? Like, how do we even begin trying to answer those questions? Like, the question is sort of like, can we have knowledge? And I guess, like, how much, right? If it's only a little bit of knowledge, it's only like, we only get to know like half of it, then half of things are certain and the other half is not, and then how much certainty do we have? Do we only have certainty about other things? But then here's the sort of spanner in the works. If we try to think about metaphysics and its traditional subject matter, at least as sometimes conceived by the dogmatists, in Aristotle's metaphysics, sometimes the subject matter is being, whatever that means. And for Aristotle, it means many things because being is said in many ways, apparently. So it's unclear that being is a singular subject that we can think about, or whether it's many beings in the metaphysics. But if you try to think about metaphysics generally, and if metaphysics is the study of being, doesn't it have to know everything? Because every being is a being.
It does.
Within the realm of thinking.
It does.
Seems like we would have to answer all the questions. Otherwise, anything that comes on the scene as a question has to exist. And
Should be answerable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know what to make of it. Like, it does seem ridiculous on the one hand, and then on the other hand, it also seems like, yeah, sure, we have to sort of be able to do this. Otherwise, what are we doing claiming to know?
We're not doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. If we can't answer everything, we're not doing it.
So in one sense, we have to be able to answer everything and leave everything said, like everything important said. And I guess on the other hand, we have to leave open the possibility that new stuff will be able to emerge, but will still be subject to the same sort of descriptive processes, or can be captured under the same framework or something like that. Because even if we know what being is or what knowing is, again, even if we think about it in those terms, in terms of the subjective term, and thinking about knowing and reasoning, if reason were unable to answer any questions put to it, and if our principle was a principle of reason, then reason wouldn't be able to reason about everything. It would only be reasoning about a limited scope of things, and then, you know, reason would have very limited knowledge in that sense. So we need to figure out how much. It seems like Kant is very much dealing with a similar problem to Aristotle in the relation of being to beings, or the many senses of being that they can be in metaphysics at play. And yeah, this is the part where I think people really get off board with the Kantian project, and maybe not so unreasonably so, but depending on what you mean by that term. Should we read on a little bit?
Yeah, let's read.
Yeah, yeah. Just the there was a strange parallel in the way that you spoke about the skeptic, and like the one doubt that refracts into the other knowledge claims.
Mm-hmm.
And then this part that is then the claim that we are now from Kant in terms of like the sense, like one thing known that will render everything else known or knowable, or and then I think the style of text, and I mean the labor and the effort, it is maybe, well, I don't know actually, like um okay, so grand kind of claim, you know, I think of people who or I at least associate the claims to a certain kind of realization, you know, like that can be made, and people sit on a certain pedestal or throne even because they've recognized being in itself, or they themselves are an instantiation of being um, in itself. So like that, I think there's something there that comes into like uh, power dynamics, or authority. Um, the the what we were on in terms of closure, I think would is also like uh like foreclosing or closing certain possibilities, or the requirement that one has a closure in order to enact a progression, or in order to there's something um yeah, I guess it's just ongoing uh an ongoing sense with this, like the or a healthy suspicion with this desire to close, you know, um, to close something so that. But that's just me uh, putting the thoughts they have to read on.
Yeah, the theme of closure is really hard, I think, and the next sentences are about to complicate it even further, I would imagine. So it's good to dwell upon. Let's read. I have not avoided reason's questions by pleading the incapacity of human reason as an excuse. Rather, I have completely specified these questions according to principles, and after discovering the point where reason has misunderstood itself, I have resolved them to reason's full satisfaction. To be sure, the answer to these questions has not turned out just as dogmatically enthusiastic lust for knowledge might have expected, for the latter could not be satisfied except through magical powers in which I am not an expert. So he's going to try and answer all of reason's questions, and he's not going to say that we can't answer everything because reason is, we just can't reason about this stuff. Reason's incapable. He's going to say, no, we're going to set up these questions. And we're going to make sure that they're specified properly. We're going to have well-formed questions. And then we're going to see how reason has misunderstood itself, and then try to show that there's a way to resolve this misunderstanding such that reason comes to its full satisfaction. So there's going to be some sort of untying of the knot, so to speak. And that last part I understand is like the answers that we're going to get are not going to be everything that we want. They're going to be a little bit disappointing, probably. Like, someone tells you they're going to explain the entirety of reality, beware, it'll probably be a little bit disappointing. But, you know, maybe that disappointment is not the result of it not being a proper answer to the question, but rather the consequence of our dogmatic enthusiasm for knowledge, that we want knowledge to be this thing that is, you know, the most perfect, complete, helpful explanation in our life. And so, I don't know, it's hard to tell what he's doing here with these magical powers in which he is not an expert. This might be more about the dogmatic subject matter, things like thinking about God and the soul, things that are mysterious, special, spooky, whatever you want to call them. But these seem to be the sorts of claims that he's making, that we're going to try and do our best here with what we've got, and it's going to, reason should be satisfied, even though it's going to be a little bit disappointing probably at the end of the day. Does that make better?
Say again?
Does that make the previous claim better?
No. No. Yes, it makes sense. I did just want to, because it's a personal frustration, you know, this real false humility that can come with like, oh, I can't know, you know? So like, I think it was the first part that you read, by pleading the incapacity of human reason as an excuse. You know, like just this constant encounter with this like mystification, instead of I guess the negativity of trying, and failing, and having that be the reason. But otherwise, um I'm not disheartened by that. It it seems in step, but then it's strange what he says next in the highlighted green. It's a strange transition then if he's saying that. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, again, maybe the next sentence will help. I'm trying to do the stage by stage, because I think like the question gets refined and the scope and the meaning of the terms slightly change. I think this is a really important section. Yet this was also not the intent of our reason's natural vocation. And the duty of philosophy was to abolish the semblance arising from misinterpretation, even if many prized and beloved delusions have to be destroyed in the process. In this business, I have made comprehensiveness my chief aim in view, and I make bold to say that there cannot be a single metaphysical problem that has not been solved here, or at least the solution of which the key has not been provided. I'm going to highlight that because I think it's important.
Not a single metaphysical problem that has not been solved here, at least the solution of which the key has not been provided. Are you a convert, Sipho?
Look, no, not yet. I was about to say, look, if anything, this man knows how to hype you up for a book.
Yeah, he's a good writer, I think. A good hype man. Yeah, hopefully Sipho pops back into the chat again. But
Yeah.
a couple concepts that I want to talk about here. Reason's natural vocation, the duty of philosophy, um, and then comprehensiveness. So reason's natural vocation is probably the first one. These topics don't really get talked about too much from what I've seen, especially in the theoretical work, because they focus on the arguments. But I think it's really important. So yeah, what's a vocation?
The it's job, but it's not it's something other than duty. Maybe something more than duty.
Well, yeah, I mean it's job, so like its function would be the one way to put it. And so the natural vocation would be the natural function of reason. So there's some sort of, again, reason's nature is to rise higher and higher into problems. So now he's telling us that the intent or reason's natural function isn't supposed to give us or satisfy the enthusiastic lust for knowledge, right? It's not supposed to give us all the answers we could have ever dreamed of. That's not the function of reason. And the duty of philosophy is not to tell us all of the things that we want to know, right? That's not what philosophy does. Philosophy doesn't like lend credence to our dreams or tell us about necessarily, I don't know, God and the soul and the world, or the things that come to mind. What it does is, according to Kant, to abolish the semblance arising from misinterpretation.
Hmm.
You get rid of false appearances.
Misinterpretation of what? Of anything and everything.
I would imagine that he has in mind reason's natural vocation. So I imagine that, so he says that after discovering the point where reason has misunderstood itself in this previous passage, so reason seems to have misinterpreted its own nature, from what I can tell.
Okay.
And the critique of pure.
Now I think I misunderstood. So has he stated yet what reason's nature is according to him? Because I'm hearing what he's saying, the function of philosophy is, but I don't know, is the function of philosophy and the function of reason for him the same?
I think that's a good question. I don't actually have the answer to it, if it makes you feel any better.
No, I thought maybe I missed it when you were reading, if you said something.
Yeah, no, so it's reason's natural vocation and the duty of philosophy was to abolish the semblance arising from misinterpretation. So I'd imagine that the duty of philosophy is something that must be fulfilled. A duty has to be actualized, right? Like I say you have to go to church on Sundays or something like that. You have to go because it's your duty or something like that. To love your neighbor. And so the duty of philosophy is to abolish these semblances, so abolish the confusions. And reasons was not the intent of reason's national vocation. So reason might be the thing that helps us to fulfill philosophy's duty. The relationship between these terms is unclear, but I don't actually know. And to answer your earlier question about the nature of reason, he said some stuff about what reason has as its nature. And the stuff that's come up so far is the things from the first page, that reason has this sort of self-transcendence. It starts from questions we ask in ordinary experience and then it travels higher and higher. So it starts from like we see the rocks falling, and then we ask, why do the rocks fall, and why do the seas move, and all of those things, and we come to questions about like, why does anything change, or what is change? Those sorts of massive questions. So reason has this sort of capacity to, or reason is the sort of searching thing so far. And we also know that it's a natural in some sense, that it's like part of our nature, that reason is part of us. So there's almost this like genetic constitution of a reason, if you want to think about it in that way.
Can you hear me, Hadley?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, sorry, my internet keeps cutting me off, but I got the gist of what you were saying.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, let's re-examine that sentence quickly. In fact, pure reason is such a perfect unity that if its principle were insufficient for even a single one of the questions that are set for it by its own nature, then this principle might as well be discarded, because then it would also not be up to answering any of the other questions with complete reliability. So if it can't answer everything about itself that it asks itself, then we might as well discard it, because it shouldn't be able to answer anything else with complete reliability. So I guess maybe one of the ways to think about this is like, who's asking the questions? Like, where did the questions come from? Like, what are the source of our questions? And let me just finish up here. I think like we are the ones asking questions most of the time, right? Like we ask like, what is nature, or what is physics, or why does the rock behave this way, or why do people act like this, or things like that. And when we ask that, there's sort of two senses in which the question could come to us. It could be that we just ask questions about stuff, and that like questions exist by themselves and on their own, and that like they just find us. There's something about nature that like prompts us to like probe into it. Or it could be something about our very nature. Like it could be part of our self-expression that we ask questions. Like what it is to be a reasoner is to be the type of thing that calls things into question, that reasons, that thinks about why things are the way that they are. And if that's what it is to be a reasoner, well, then why would we trust ourselves about any questions that we couldn't answer if we're the ones making the questions up? Why shouldn't we be able to answer the questions if there's no external source for the question?
No, in other words, we use reason to ask the question, and we also use reason to answer the very same questions that reason brought up.
I think that's what he has. Something like that.
Yeah, if it can't answer one question. Yeah, the same thing answering the questions, the same thing asking the question. Shit. Anyway, sorry. That caught me for a second.
I think it does get overlooked like very often. Like, who's formulating questions? Like, it's not a question that comes up in Kant, but it might be worth thinking about. Like, where do questions come from? Will questions be answerable? Like, who poses a question? Is it me? Is it some faculty of reason in the soul? Does the world pose questions? is it like a culturally passed down artifact that like questions come to be? You know, like the
From
question,
somewhere else.
yeah, the question like what is a question seems to be an important question. It's easy to say like what a proposition or a statement is, right? We say like A is B or the sun is hot, right? And we combine a subject and a predicate or a substance and an accident with one another. Sun is hot. We make a claim about the nature of the sun, so to speak, but that's a statement. And the statement says something specific about the thing that it attempts to address. But the question, is the sun hot? That's bizarre. It seems to throw the whole relationship into relief. Like, I don't know. How would we judge? I know that we do judge. I'm not stupid and that simple, but like, one of the silly ways that you can think about answering the question is like, oh, you know, everything else that we know that is hot, we usually like engage in with touch. But like, would we have to touch the sun to figure out whether it's hot or something like that? Like, how do we gauge? How do we gauge the temperature?
So hot we can't touch it. So hot we can't touch it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's bizarre. Like, what are we doing when we ask a question? We're throwing up some sort of like this relationship, or we're trying to throw a relationship into question. And if it was part of the nature of the things, this is just improvising on the spot, it doesn't seem like the question would ever come up. Right? The sun is hot, right? And if what it is to be the sun is to be hot, then surely we'd always know that the sun is hot. We'd never ask something stupid like, is the sun hot, or is the earth round, or do the planets rotate around us, or do we rotate around the planets? Like, surely if those are all facts in the sense of this is the nature of the thing, then how do we ever get confused about it? Like, what?
We question, I think far less than questioning reality. We're questioning if our perception aligns with reality. I think we're always asking, am I perceiving this correctly? But we're just obviously applying that to different things. When we ask, is it hot? We're asking about our perception of the thing. Hey, but I feel hot. Is it hot? Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, okay, I might think the earth is flat, but am I right about the earth being actually flat?
Yeah. And like,
so, yeah.
So it seems like in that case, we're the problem.
Yeah. It seems that we're the problem, not the objects. It seems like the object of study should be us. We might be we might be misaligned some way.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to think of it. Because like if we're the problem, then we're the source of the questions, right? Because the problem throws the question into relief. Like, I don't know. We see somebody, I don't know, run into like, or running a tap and like running their hand in the water and we see like steam and we're like, shouldn't that be hot? And they're like, no, it's not hot to me. Or something like that. And you're like, no, but the steam, like that's heat, like a sign of heat. So it's clear whether it's hot or like whether heat is something only in relation to me. But in either way, if we're the problem and the questions only come from us, surely the problems gotta be resolvable, right? Like, it's our fault. Who else is gonna answer questions for us?
It kind of reinforces the claim that things just are what they are. Like things just are, and then the issue is just with us now. We're perceiving them as they are, or we're just confused about what they are. It reinforces that issue again.
Yeah. This is going to be fun once we get to the actual like sections, because it's unclear whether Kant thinks that our perception is the problem. It might be that our perception as the problem is itself a problem.
I'm already agreeing with him already from what you just said. I'm like, I think I already agree with him on that. And it will be interesting.
The question's like, so you can think about like Descartes or someone like that, right? And he gives those examples of like, I think he starts off from simple sensory examples of like the sticks in water, straight sticks in water appear bent, or large things like the planets that are far away appear small even though they're big.
Small. Yeah.
Like the senses deceive us, or they seem to deceive us. And then you might want to ask the question like, how does that square with our ability to have sense knowledge or do science or empirical studies or any of those sorts of things, right? If the senses are constantly deceiving us, how is testing anything through the senses going to give us a better answer to things? Why is running an experiment going to solve this issue if our senses are always incorrect? Yeah.
I guess, yeah, it's a good question. They got it a good point there. I mean, I feel like some of these examples are blowing shit out of proportion, but he's got a good point.
Yeah, literally blowing shit out of proportion.
Yeah. Like overlooked. The thing about the senses is, or rather, a question I always feel like he is overlooked about the senses, so-called illusions, is there always seems to be a function to the senses illusion, right? With the one with distance, right? The example with distance, planets appearing to be small from afar, and understanding that things from afar are part of, like, you get what I mean, the part of your perception. Like silly examples for balls about to hit you, part of the thing that makes you move out of the way is seeing it get bigger and bigger and becoming more of a threat. You get what I mean? So that's why sometimes I'm like, some of his examples are just just blown out of proportion. Like, of course it appears small, because it's not something I should worry about. It's far away. I should worry about the things that are immediate. And here.
But also, like, you know that the illusion is an illusion. Like, the straight
exactly. So it's not that much of an illusion.
And yeah, bent. But the appearance is not the straightness of the stick, right? So, like, in order to see it as wrong, there needs to be some sort of function to realize it's not what it appears.
Yeah. And that seems also to come out of the very perception he's complaining about.
Yeah. So that might be an issue.
Like, he sees the stick appears as if it's something else when it's in water, so he can't trust his eyesight. But the eyesight's what caused him to see that it appears as something else when it's in water. Like, I get so, yeah, but anyway, it's like it gets so confusing for me. I'm like, but your eyesight is the thing that showed you it's an illusion. You're relying on it to see it's an illusion.
I'm trying to think about the examples that he's using now, and for some reason, now that you said that you don't believe it, I sound like I believe it more. And I'm wondering about the straightness of the sticks. Straight and bent are mathematical qualities. Like the straightness of the stick is a mathematical quality, and so the straightness of the perceived line might not be the perception of straight that we have, because nothing in reality is going to be perfectly straight, right? Like everything is going to have. And then the distance between planets having an effect on their size. Proportion is also mathematically calculable. So like we see the thing through our eyes and we see that it looks small, but like.
But we know it isn't.
Yeah, and the mathematical calculation that we do to figure out that it is actually big is based on like
Mm.
distance, I would imagine, and some sort of proportional function. So I wonder if he doesn't have something like that in
Some
mind.
answer. Yeah, yeah,
Like,
probably.
what are we seeing with? Like, this is
You
getting
get what
off
I'm
topic from Kant, but like, are we seeing with the eyes or the imagination or reason? Where on earth are mathematics? Like, they're not in the experience, in the,
saying?
well, at least
They
in
still
the,
need to be.
they seem like they play
they-
a role, but where they are is also confusing.
mm. It's it's so hard to get rid of perception because even the calculations require perception. In order to
Mhm.
calculate all these things, we need to first take into consideration the distance we perceive and all these things, and we need to trust them in any case. So it seems so hard to just completely dismiss perception. Well, I don't see how we're gonna get to anything without it.
Yeah,
I'm not one to usually agree with physicalists, but like shit, I'm like shit. Perception is really important.
yeah, and then yet again, I wonder about that, right? Because like even the perceived distance is like representable on a diagram,
Mhm.
right? So I don't know, we plot the observer as a point and we plot the planet as a point. This is getting very
Yeah.
far. It will be important to get to conception of space. And then we draw a line and we figure out the distance between the observer and the thing observed or something like that. And we figure out the relative size in between those. And we could do that on like a piece of paper, but the point and the lines that we plot are never going to be perfect. So like, do we need the perception, or like can we just use imagination? Like, can we just plot the points in our mind and the lines that we use to construct the proportion? Um, and then are we thinking about perception or are we thinking about imagination? Where where is the maths going on, Sipho?
Look, I'm saying it doesn't even pick up without perception. We don't get to the maths without perception. Is my thing. Like we're
I
not
guess
even gonna get
I'm
there.
asking you the question like, so I agree with you that like perception is playing an important role here. Um, but
Yeah.
I'm asking like, do we need perception to get mathematical concepts? Like, do we derive our mathematical concepts from perception? Or do we apply our mathematical concepts to perception? Is
Our,
our experience of the
yeah.
world like, are we superimposing our imagination onto the flux of experience? Or are we taking like the shape of things from their experience?
Yeah, I'd say we're applying it to experience.
Yeah,
Say we're
strange.
applying it to experience. I guess my certainty is not so much on I'm not saying that everything we see is certain. I'm saying we at least have to be certain about the thing we're applying it. We at least have to be certain that the things we applying, we have to be certain about the things we're applying mathematics to. By making sense?
Yeah, that there are some things that we can apply it to or something.
Yeah. And in that case, we have to trust our senses in some light. Now, obviously, we can't trust them completely. But begs the question, what can we trust completely in any case?
Partially what we're trying to answer here. There must be
I can see,
something.
bro, I can see why the skeptics are there. And see why the skeptics are there, bro.
Yeah, they're useful.
Mm.
I think we should try and finish this paragraph, this next paragraph, and then maybe call it.
I will.
Go on too long. So he says, while I am saying this, that he's going to answer everything with complete reliability, I believe I perceive in the face of the reader an indignation mixed with contempt at claims that are apparently so pretentious and immodest, and yet they are incomparably more moderate than those of any author of the commonest program who pretends to prove the simple nature of the soul or the necessity of a first beginning of the world. So, I mean, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Anyone that wants to prove that the soul is a simple substance or that the world began is apparently claiming more than they've answered every single question of reason. That reason must be capable of providing the key to all metaphysical questions. But isn't the simplicity of the soul and the beginning of the world a metaphysical question?
It is. It is.
What on earth is he doing?
Bruh.
He goes on to say, for such an author, one who talks about the simple nature of the world or the beginning of the world, pledges himself to extend human cognition beyond all bounds of possible experience, of which I humbly admit that this wholly surpasses my capacity. Instead, I have to do merely with reason itself and its pure thinking. To gain acquaintance with them, I need not seek far beyond myself, because it is in myself that I encounter them. And common logic also already gives me an example of how the simple acts of reason may be fully and systematically enumerated. Only here the question is raised how much I may hope to settle with these simple acts if all the material and assistance of experience are taken away from me. So I think there's a few things that are important. The people that talk about the soul and the beginning of the world, these are previous metaphysicians, I would imagine, and they're trying to get beyond experience. The soul is not an object of experience. We never experienced the soul. But we're going to say that the soul is simple, that it's a unity, that it doesn't have parts, something like that, right? What simple doesn't have parts, and what doesn't have parts might be indestructible or something like that, because it can't change. And then the first beginning of the world, that's the cosmological argument. The world began to be, either the world was eternal or the world had a beginning. That seems like an important question. And it seems like one that not only metaphysics tries to answer, but maybe science sometimes, if it oversteps its bounds. The Big Bang sounds like a question, like an answer to that. There was some first event that started the world or whatever, where the world came into being. So if the Big Bang counts as an answer to the question, was there a first beginning of the world, then the critique of pure reason is even more modest than that. Answering every single question is more modest than asserting that the world had a beginning.
Yeah.
Some
Which is also that question as well. If it's every question, even these questions is saying shit. Like it seems like he's the author, he's shitting one. It seems like he's the author, he's shitting one in a way.
Yeah, well, he says that the other people try to go beyond the bounds of a possible experience. And then he says that goes beyond him. He doesn't know how to get beyond the bounds of a possible experience. He doesn't have magical powers, I think, as he said in the previous sections. He's not a magician. All he has is reason itself and its thinking. And to become acquainted with reason, he doesn't need to go very far. Doesn't need to travel the end of the world to find a copy in German of the original Critique of Pure Reason, or come to the States for education or whatever. Reasons there are along. It is in myself that I encounter them. Somewhere in me, apparently, there's reason. I know I haven't showed it off very much, but apparently all I have to do is just think about myself, and I'll be thinking about reasoning in some way. reason is a part of us or something like that. And he says, because it is in myself that I encounter them. And common logic also already gives me an example of how the simple acts of reason may be fully and systematically enumerated. Logic is a subject where reason plays a part in, apparently. You might want to think about things like the principle of non-contradiction, the law of excluded middle, all those sort of logical laws that we use. Kant thinks that logic is complete, essentially. We'll see this maybe in the second preface, but like Aristotelian logic might be the logic at play here. And Kant thinks that that's reason at work. We have a complete systematic outline of all the acts of reason in logic. And you can sort of think about that a little bit more, and it might be a little bit easy to see once you think about like the principle of non-contradiction. Right, a thing cannot be in the same place at the same time in the same way. If it's itself and different to itself or something like that, right? A thing cannot be and not be itself. And anything that commits a contradiction is going to be contradictory, right? If I say the sun is hot and cold, you're going to look at me like I'm stupid, probably, or you're going to think that there's something wrong with that answer because it asserts a straightforward contradiction. And so it seems reasonable that logic is a system of reason, right? Like reason is the thing that sets up logical laws, and these logical laws are the basic principles that all rational accounts must follow. That's kind of what we think when we're trying to reason, I think.
Bruh. Now I can see why you did your thesis on this. I can see. Bruh.
Yeah, the last sentence is good. Only here the question is raised how much I may hope to settle with the simple acts with logic, if all the material and assistance of experience are taken away from them. So like, what can we know by like pure logic? Do we learn anything by pure logic? Is there a logic that functions without any experiential content? What is logic? I guess is a good question. Logic also seems like very difficult because just as like a final thing, it has a similar issue maybe to mathematics that we brought up. Maybe the issue is slightly different. Does logic tell us anything if we don't have anything to apply it to? Like the claim that a thing cannot be and be what it is at the same time. It's great. What on earth does it mean? And doesn't it sometimes seem wrong? It can't be hot and cold today. But Dan said that the sun was out where he's at, but it's also cold. So is it hot in one place and cold in another? And then I don't know. Dickens opens up with like A Tale of Two Cities, I think opens up with like it was the best of times and the worst of times. Does he mean that it was the best of times in some aspect and the worst of times in others? Or was it both the best and worst? What on earth does logic even do? It doesn't seem very helpful once we start to try and think about things. If anything, it seems like a hindrance.
It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Yeah.
I heard another crazy one this week. I was watching an old show. Guy was saying he's perfectly happy being miserable. Like, ah.
Yeah, so I think these are the questions we should keep in
Yeah.
mind. Hopefully, next session we can finish the preface. I think I'm gonna scroll down to see how much longer we have. It's like
Hmm.
2, 3, 4 pages. Oh, we got a long way to go, guys. But we'll get there. I
Good.
think,
We are used to moving slow here.
yeah, I think we've done maybe half of what we need to do for the preface, and the preface is hard. Um, I think the preface and the introduction will probably take the longest because once we get into like the transcendental aesthetic, even though it'll be confusing, there's actual arguments to follow. Here, we're sort of just wading in the water, trying to figure out what on earth he's talking about and seeing what the whole like the plan for the project of the book is. So, bound to be raising questions. Closure comes at the end.
So we're doing this again Sunday next week.
Yeah, I think so.
Can we can we confirm? Can we confirm on Friday who can make it on the Sundays, the coming Sundays? Because I know sometimes stuff pops up out of the blue.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm really keen for this. Actually, I'm really keen for this.
It is
Sounds
good.
like it's gonna be some exciting. Yeah, it sounds like gonna be some exciting times. Sounds like it's gonna be some exciting times.
Have a squiz at the other published videos. It might be interesting.
Right.
I don't know
To
if I
look
did
at,
too detailed notes. Like chapter, but the AI companion has been on, so maybe it can start help me doing that.
are we? Please send us the note.
Sweet. Okay. Sweet. Thanks, Hadley.
Oh, so we're good with that.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll
This is
see
always
you
so
in a week.
sad. Yeah.
Say again?
I hope that the pace is fine. Like I part of me wanted to get through the whole preface today, and I was trying to move a little bit
Yeah.
quicker, but like you can't rush.
Yeah.
It just doesn't like
Uh,
work.
Yeah, I'm in this like I'm in this real state of dilemma in terms of like a lot of my philosophical orientation has been it is around like it's had dialogue as its kind of foundation.
Mhm.
So like like downstream from that is just like um if the dialogue is the important thing, then like pace doesn't really matter at all, or you know. Um, and then I'm also aware of the thing that's coming into a dilemma is like that sometimes the mutual collaboration, like moving together, um, it's it can't it can't it needs to be in a dialectic with a deep personal work.
Mhm.
Um, and then like I guess yeah, it's an ungrounding of this dialogical base, I guess. Um, so I'm not sure what to think of it because like a lot of how I've orientated myself has put dialogue as foundational, really. Um, and it
Yeah, I
came
mean,
up in the end there, like say again?
oh no, I just mean like it's been valuable for me because like stuff has been brought up that I haven't really focused on, which has been good. Like this notion of closure and you pushing me on that today was good because I haven't like
Yeah,
fleshed it out too much.
yeah.
uh,
This this I mean, yeah, I mean, like I've shaped what I've done by this idea that dialogue is foundational or can and we inherit kind of inspiration for that with the reading of Plato, the Life of Inquiry, and I guess I give it a specific dialogical and fellowship emphasis. But this piece um, on logic at the end that I thought I would the the I said to Larry a little while back that I'll try and express to him how Zizek um, dialectical options. Say again?
Oh, Zizek? Sorry, you cut out
Con-
pretty much.
Okay, I thought that was just me.
No.
Gap, do you mind saying that again? You were talking to Larry about what?
Parmenides, in the Parmenides, Plato's Parmenides, where the different hypotheses are put forward, that like the if being is, then, and then like if being is not, then, and then the reading is that rather than those being something like claims about how reality is, the very logical movement or the contradiction is it's the exercise of moving through the logical contradiction that is the most real thing about the dialogue. Something like that. I haven't really said it too well. So like, what is logic for, or what is logic? It's something like um, and then this is where the kind of I think it's kind of Hegelian, like the the progression is by a realization of contradiction. So then something like we'd say like being is itself um, moving by means of contradiction. It always contradictory. So then when Parmenides puts forward like these hypotheses, then like the reading is that it's not that these are like competing claims about uh, very the means or the process, but I know we're closing, and I want closure because in a pit.
Yeah, I mean, before we go, sounds like you're just being very Hegelian. Sounds like he generally has this thing that he says something like, reason is restlessness, or something like that. And the motor of the Hegelian logic is contradiction. So at each stage of the logic, there's a contradiction, and the contradiction is part of the essential motion of that moment of thinking. And then the fulfillment of that thinking is where the thinking falls apart and finds completion within another moment. So, like the dialectical movement is itself a unity of opposites, or like a coming together of contradiction. Definitely not what we're going to be seeing here, which will be the fun part. Um, Kant's got a very, for someone who thinks so dialectically, he's got a very static logic.
Yeah, so what's static about it? Like the units or the like how it constitutes experience, like space and time, or it like the formula that he uses, like the signifiers, the reference, or like
The laws that he uses.
Oh, gents.
Yeah.
if something is, then
bounce.
it isn't. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. We'll see what we can talk about with the stasis of logic. I also need to probably head out, but appreciate it. It might
Agreed.
be the stat.
It might be.
Oh wait, Hadley, when do you want that essay?
Whenever. Maybe like end of the month, end of next month, depending on how busy you are.
Okay, let's aim for end of next month. Let's aim for the later date.
Yeah, don't make it too
Gents,
long.
I gotta Come again?
Don't make it too long. Just write something. Like 3 pages to 5 pages should be fine.
Ah, it's perfect.
Cool.
Don't make it too long. Sounds like my meeting call. Let me go, gent.
Okay.
Right.
Uh,
Ciao, guys. Check in a week.
Peace.